The Orcs reside deep in the dark corners of Middle-earth, where shadows exist and the scent of war dominates the air. As the final battle of the War of the Ring faded into history, the Orcs were left facing an uncertain future. Did they cling to the remains of their revenge, or did they seek unexpected alliances, motivated by the light of hope for redemption in an era where they lost their power? In this chapter, we explore the complex and tragic origins of the Orcs. They weren't always the monstrous creatures we know today. In the ancient past, they were once elves, beings of beauty and grace. But Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, twisted and corrupted them through dark magic, creating a new race to serve his malevolent will. The transformation of these noble beings into the Orcs marks a tragic loss of innocence, their pain reflected in their struggle between their old selves and the horrors they became. As we venture deeper into the heart of Dol Guldur, we reflect on Tolkien's words from the Silmarillion. Orcs were made by Morgoth out of the race of the elves, perverting them into a mockery of the fair folk. This shift not only illustrates their fall from grace, but also their perpetual struggle with the grief and loss of who they once were. Orcs in the War of the Ring. During the War of the Ring, the Orcs were not just the foot soldiers of darkness, they were a central force in the strategy of Sauron and Saruman. These creatures, once twisted from elves into brutal agents of destruction, became key players in the conflict that would determine the fate of Middle-earth. While Sauron's power stretched across the land, it was the Orcs that carried out his orders with ruthless efficiency, shaping the outcome of major battles and campaigns. The Battle of Helm's Deep is perhaps one of the most vivid portrayals of Orcish aggression. The massive Uruk-hai, bred by Saruman to be stronger and more enduring than the regular Orcs, led the charge against the stronghold of Rohan. Tolkien writes that the ground trembled under their feet as the Uruks approached, and their cries were like the roar of a great storm. Their assault was not just a physical one, but psychological, as the relentless pounding of their weapons on the walls of the fortress was meant to break the defenders' spirits. The Uruks had no mercy, and they fought with an intensity that seemed almost inhuman. In the end, the Battle of Helm's Deep was a brutal reminder of the Orcs' role in the larger conflict, a role designed to sow fear, destruction, and ultimately, victory for evil. The Siege of Gondor, where Orcs laid waste to the great city of Minas Tirith, showed another face of their battle tactics, their ability to overwhelm with sheer numbers and strategic innovation. The Orcs' siege tactics were designed to break the defenses of the city, and they succeeded with horrifying efficiency. Tolkien describes the siege towers that came like black giants pushing against the walls of Gondor. These machines, manned by Orcs, were designed to destroy anything in their path, and they created an overwhelming onslaught. The Orcs were the foot soldiers, but they were also the agents of terror, capable of inflicting not just physical harm, but an emotional toll on their enemies. Their role in the siege was not only to invade and conquer, but to ensure that the forces of good were demoralized, crippled by the never-ending onslaught of Orcish brutality. At the climax of the war, during the final assault on the Black Gate, the Orcs embodied the very nature of Sauron's army, chaotic, unyielding, and terrifying. The clash at the Black Gate was a storm of darkness and hatred. The Orcs fought with desperation, knowing that the fall of Sauron meant the end of their existence. They were creatures of shadow, and in the Black Gate, they represented the darkness of Sauron's will. The battle was a maelstrom of violence, with Orcs, men, and all manner of creatures locked in a deadly struggle. In the end, it was the courage of the free peoples that triumphed over the Orcs, but not before the enemy had caused significant damage. In quieter moments of the war, Orcs were often used in skirmishes, raids, and sabotage, making them a persistent and insidious threat. They targeted supply lines, ambushing travelers and spreading fear. These smaller operations were just as effective in breaking down the morale of the free peoples, demonstrating the versatility of the Orcs as soldiers. Their constant presence, no matter how small the attack, kept the forces of good on edge, forcing them to fight on multiple fronts. While their role in the War of the Ring was primarily one of destruction, the Orcs' brutality also revealed the power dynamics within Sauron's army. They were, ultimately, tools, pawns in a game of war, existing to serve the Dark Lord's will. However, their sheer numbers, combined with their viciousness and tactical cunning, made them formidable foes, capable of inflicting lasting damage. The Orcs were not just mindless monsters, they were a critical part of Sauron's dark machine. The fall of Sauron and the aftermath. The fall of Sauron marked a cataclysmic shift in Middle-earth. For centuries, the Orcs had been the loyal servants of his will, instruments of his power. But with his defeat at the hands of the Free Peoples, the land that had once been steeped in shadow was left in ruin. Mordor, once a thriving epicenter of terror, was reduced to a dim wasteland. The fiery Mount Doom was silenced, and the once mighty fortress of Barad-dûr was reduced to rubble. The land that had bred such fear was now a hushed echo of its former self. The Orcs, now leaderless and directionless, wandered the desolate plains of Mordor. These once feared warriors, who had terrorized nations and fought for a Dark Lord with singular devotion, now found themselves lost in the ruins. Tolkien paints a haunting image of these lost Orcs, struggling to find purpose in a world that had moved on without them. The shadow that had once loomed over Middle-earth was lifted, but the Orcs were left with nothing but the remnants of their former lives. As the Orcs scattered from Mordor, many found themselves without direction. Some sought refuge in the wilderness, trying to escape from the oppressive memories of their past, but they were met with suspicion and disdain. The Free Peoples had long viewed them as nothing more than creatures of darkness, and after the fall of Sauron, that perception did not change. The Orcs, once the foot soldiers of evil, were now outcasts in a world that no longer needed them. Their past as servants of the Dark Lord had rendered them expendable, and their future was uncertain. Dol Guldur, the once feared fortress in the forest of Mirkwood, now stood abandoned. Once a place of dread where the Orcs had served under Sauron's influence, it was now silent, its walls crumbling and overgrown with vines. The Orcs who had once held this place felt displaced, disconnected from the dark power that had given their lives purpose. The fortress, now deserted, seemed to reflect the existential crisis the Orcs were facing. Without a master to serve, without a war to fight, what were they? Meanwhile, the great mines of Moria, which had once been a hub of Orcish activity, now stood empty. The Orcs who had inhabited the dark depths of the dwarven city were either driven away or destroyed in the aftermath of the war. Tolkien describes Moria as bereft of its Orcish inhabitants, now left to echo with the ghosts of the past. The deep, dark halls of Moria, once filled with the sounds of battle and the cries of the dying, were now eerily silent, a reminder of the destruction and conflict that had plagued Middle-earth for so long. Without Sauron, the Orcs were left to contend with an uncertain future. Some may have sought to rebuild, to find new purpose, but the scars of their past were too deep. The world, having been freed from the shadow of evil, had no room for these creatures of darkness. The Orcs were not just fighting for survival, they were fighting for identity. What could they become in a world that had no place for them? The Orcs' new reality. In the wake of Sauron's fall, the Orcs found themselves in a new and unfamiliar world. Their old purpose had been to serve the Dark Lord, to fight for his power, and to spread fear and domination. But now, with that world shattered, the Orcs were forced to reckon with their past and to question what their future held. For many, this new reality was filled with uncertainty and isolation. Some Orcs attempted to start anew, seeking refuge in the far reaches of Middle-earth. They were drawn to the outer lands, hoping to find peace away from the memories of war and violence. However, the Orcs' past was a heavy burden. and the free peoples of Middle-earth could not easily forget what they had done. Many orcs, no matter how far they wandered, were met with mistrust, hostility, and fear. They had been the instruments of evil for so long that their attempts to change were viewed with suspicion. Could the orcs, once seen as nothing more than tools of darkness, truly reinvent themselves? Tolkien's writings suggest that despite their violent nature, orcs were capable of introspection and perhaps change. In Letter 153, he reflects on the possibility of orcs having a place in a world that values goodness and light. Though they were created from evil, they were still part of the world, and in that world, there was potential for change. This idea presents a profound paradox. The orcs were creatures forged in darkness, but they were not beyond the reach of redemption. Yet, the road to redemption was not easy. As the orcs wandered through Middle-earth trying to escape the shadows of their past, they were faced with a difficult question. Could they ever be accepted by the other races? Could they find a way to live in peace, or would they remain forever outcasts? This question was not just about the orcs themselves. It was a reflection of Middle-earth's capacity for forgiveness. Could a world that had suffered so much under the weight of evil ever forgive the creatures who had served that evil so completely? The orcs' new reality was a world of ambiguity. They were no longer warriors of darkness, but they were still marked by their past. In a world that had moved on, they were left behind, struggling to find their place. The search for redemption was filled with challenges, not only from the world around them, but also from within themselves. Could they ever escape the shadow of their former selves? Could they find a new way to live, or would they always be defined by the war they had fought for so long? Chapter 5: Redemption and the Future of the Orcs. As Middle-earth entered a new era following Sauron's defeat, the orcs found themselves at a crossroads. Once tools of unimaginable destruction, now they were left to ponder the very essence of their existence. For many, the loss of their former master meant more than just a change in their immediate circumstances. It meant a complete re-evaluation of their place in the world. Could these once mighty warriors shed the darkness that had defined them for so long and find a path to redemption? The concept of redemption for the orcs is one fraught with tension. They were, after all, the creations of Morgoth, beings twisted and corrupted beyond recognition from their origins as elves. They were the embodiment of malice, a species bred for war, destruction, and subjugation. Their history was filled with betrayal, cruelty, and unrelenting violence, so the idea that they could change, that they could seek redemption, is nothing short of paradoxical. Tolkien himself wrestled with this idea in his letters, particularly in Letter 153, where he acknowledges that the orcs were perversions of what they once were, beings of beauty twisted into creatures of malice. Yet Tolkien also alludes to the possibility that they were not irredeemable. While the orcs may have been created as instruments of evil, the world in which they lived still held the potential for change, for growth. The very nature of Middle-earth, despite all the darkness that had once consumed it, was, at its core, a world that valued life, compassion, and the possibility of redemption. For many orcs, redemption could mean different things. Some might long to escape their past, to find a new identity far from the shadow of Sauron. Others might seek to atone for their role in the wars they had fought, perhaps through acts of kindness or by choosing not to engage in violence ever again. However, the harsh reality is that Middle-earth, while filled with individuals capable of forgiveness, was not quick to forget the horrors the orcs had wrought. Would the free peoples of Middle-earth ever accept the orcs as anything other than instruments of evil? Would they ever trust them again after so many years of conflict? The answers to these questions remain elusive, but the possibility of change, however remote, is a powerful aspect of the orcs' new existence. Their future, as bleak as it may seem, is not entirely devoid of hope. The journey of redemption would be a long one, fraught with challenges. For some orcs, The very idea of redemption might feel like an impossible dream. For others, it could be the first step toward a new future. The Orcs' struggle for identity. The end of the War of the Ring left the Orcs with an identity crisis. For millennia, they had been defined by one thing: their servitude to evil. They were the soldiers of Sauron, the agents of destruction in a war that spanned generations. Their sole purpose had been to wreak havoc and spread terror. But now, with Sauron's fall, that purpose was gone. The Orcs were no longer the relentless forces of darkness they had once been, but they were also no longer free. They found themselves caught in a limbo between the world that had defined them and a new world that had no place for them. For many Orcs, their identity had been shaped entirely by their role in Sauron's army. They had been warriors, but beyond that, what were they? When you strip away their master and their purpose, what is left? The Orcs had been created in such a way that their entire existence was tied to the power of their Dark Lord. They were the foot soldiers in a larger cosmic battle, but now that battle was over. They were left with nothing but the shattered remnants of their past and a future that seemed as uncertain as the land they wandered. In the quiet aftermath of the war, many Orcs began to question who they were without Sauron. Some of them might have turned inward, searching for answers in the depths of their own beings. They had been corrupted, twisted, and shaped into something they had not chosen to be. Could they have been something else, something better? The question of whether Orcs could ever recover a sense of their former selves, a trace of the beauty and grace that they once embodied as elves, was central to their struggle for identity. At the same time, the Orcs' struggle for identity was complicated by the world around them. Middle-earth had moved on from the War of the Ring, and the other races of the world had no interest in indulging the Orcs' existential crisis. For the Free Peoples, Orcs were still seen as monstrous, vile creatures that could not be trusted. Their mere presence was a reminder of the great evils that had once plagued the world. For many, the Orcs' very existence was a painful reminder of a past they wished to forget. Thus, Orcs were left in a state of profound alienation. They were cast aside, unwanted and unloved. In the ruins of Mordor, Dol Guldur and Moria, the Orcs wandered aimlessly, their former lives gone and their future uncertain. This sense of alienation and loss would be a defining characteristic of their lives in the post-Sauron era. For some, it would lead to despair, while for others, it might be the catalyst for self-discovery and change. The question remained, could the Orcs ever find a new identity? Could they redefine themselves in a world that had rejected them, or would they forever be defined by their past? The journey of self-discovery was as complex as it was painful, and the answers, like so many other things in Middle-earth, remained unclear. The Orcs and the concept of forgiveness. Forgiveness lies at the heart of any potential redemption for the Orcs. In Tolkien's works, forgiveness is a powerful theme, whether it is the forgiveness of individuals like Gollum or the idea of grace that pervades the actions of characters like Frodo and Aragorn. For the Orcs, however, forgiveness is a complicated and nuanced issue. Could the Free Peoples of Middle-earth forgive these creatures for the countless atrocities they had committed? Could they extend grace to beings who had been bred for evil, whose very existence had been defined by cruelty and destruction? The question of forgiveness is not just about the Orcs seeking forgiveness for their past actions. It is about the possibility of a new relationship between the Orcs and the other races of Middle-earth. Orcs, in their new post-Sauron world, must first learn how to forgive themselves for the monstrous acts they had committed, but they must also contend with the unforgiving nature of the world around them. The Free Peoples had no reason to forgive them. They had no reason to trust them. However, as Tolkien explores in many of his works, forgiveness is not just an act of mercy, it is also a choice. In the world of Middle-earth, forgiveness often comes in the form of personal growth and transformation. Frodo forgives Gollum for the betrayal in The Lord of the Rings because, in the end, Gollum is a tragic figure, shaped by his own inner torment. The same could be said of the Orcs. They are not born evil, they are shaped into it. Their origins are rooted in tragedy, and their very existence is a perversion of what they could have been. Could the free peoples of Middle-earth ever forgive the Orcs, knowing that they too had been victims of a greater evil? It is also worth considering whether Orcs themselves could forgive the world that had rejected them. For many, the concept of forgiveness would be foreign. After all, they had been bred for conflict, for war. But for others, the desire for peace and the possibility of redemption might lead them to seek forgiveness, not only from others, but also from themselves. Perhaps in their hearts, the Orcs yearned for a life free from the endless cycle of violence and hatred. Ultimately, the question of forgiveness is one that does not have an easy answer. For the Orcs, the path to redemption is fraught with challenges, both internal and external. Whether they can ever be forgiven, and whether they can ever forgive themselves, remains one of the most difficult questions in Tolkien's universe. Conclusion: the Orcs' uncertain path forward. The tale of the Orcs in Middle-earth is one of deep tragedy and transformation, where creatures born of darkness struggle to find meaning in a world that has moved on from their violent past. Once twisted by Morgoth's malice and later enslaved by Sauron's will, the Orcs became symbols of evil and destruction. But with Sauron's fall, they were left without purpose, wandering a world that no longer needed them, questioning their place in it. Their future remains uncertain, a path full of challenges and the haunting weight of their history. Can the Orcs, once defined by cruelty and conflict, find redemption? Can they shed the shadows of their past and forge new identities? The possibility of change, though distant, still lingers, offering hope for those who seek it. As we reflect on the Orcs' journey, we are reminded that even the darkest histories hold the potential for renewal. Whether they can overcome their tragic origins and rebuild their lives in a world that once feared them is an open question, but their struggle for redemption offers a powerful story of transformation. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of the Orcs' complex and tragic history. Their story is one of hope, struggle, and the search for identity in a world that offers both light and darkness. Please share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth explorations of Middle-earth's vast and captivating lore. Until next time, may your journey be guided by light and free from shadows.